Hey everybody, sorry for the little bit of a late start here. Last session ran just a minute long there. I'm frantically letting people in here, and once I spot Jeff, I will promote him to co-host and give him the permissions he needs. Hey Jeff, welcome. Give me just 1 second, and I'll give you the powers here.
All righty, great. Are you going to be my my host?
There you go. I don't know who it is officially, but I am starting your meeting and I'm getting you all ready to go. So yep, looks like it's me.
Let me get my presentation going here. And get it playing. Okay, Brandon, are you seeing the main slide?
Yes, sir. Looks like you're ready.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, looks like Microsoft wants to restart PowerPoint. All right. I guess I'll let it do that. Okay. Are we back in business?
It helps if I'm unmuted. Yep, absolutely. Looks like we're good.
Well, so long as Microsoft, it's like freezing. PowerPoint is freezing up on me. There it goes again. It's it's closing the program. I'll try it one more time here. Are there folks in the room yet, Brandon?
Yeah, it looks like we've got 50, a little over 50, maybe about 55 now.
All right. And are they hearing us? Can I speak to them while the presentation's trying to load? All right, great. Hello, everybody. PowerPoint has decided it wanted to restart, so I'm letting it do its thing here. So thanks for your patience, everybody. Let's see if the third time will be the charm. It is not happy. This is the third time that Microsoft has said it needs, or PowerPoint has said it needs to restart. Just one more reason to hate PowerPoint, right?
An unfortunate side effect of our current circumstances.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to try this again. And it might be the translator program that I'm trying to run, and I may have to just get rid of that translator program. And okay, is it working now? Are you seeing slides move?
Yep, and everything looks like it's moving.
Okay, I'm just going to have to ask everybody in the audience to please hold your breath for this whole presentation, if you would, please. That might be what it takes to make this go through without having to restart. All right, Brandon, do you want to do an introduction, or how do you want to do this? Or do we have a host?
That's up to you. I think Kay's given you some high praise over the course of the conference, and everybody who was here at our morning show, I think, knows who you are. But we have Jeff Renfrow from Colorado Christian University talking about neo-traditional students and online discussions today. So Jeff, thank you for joining us, and please let us know what you have to say. Educate us.
Thank you, Brandon. So Brandon, do you think you'll be my host then is that where we're going to land? Because I would like to have somebody who can monitor the chat for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep an eye on the chat for you.
Thanks. And also, I just want everybody to know that I have no problem if somebody wants to fire up their microphone and interject a comment or a question or something. So Brandon, if somebody asks to do that in the chat, please feel free to interrupt and just fire up your microphones, okay? Otherwise, Brandon, if you could just let me know if there's something in the chat that I need to be aware of.
Sounds great.
We'll get started. So if you guys like to interact with these presentations, I do have a poll everywhere. There's only 2 poll questions in this presentation, but if you want to participate, that's the address for it down at the bottom. I would suggest opening up another tab on your computer. I'm just going to pollev.com/JeffRenfro250, and you'll be able to join us in a couple of questions that will be coming up here. You can also use your mobile device if you like. So I am Jeff Renfrow. You may have heard earlier, if you were at the coffee chat this morning, I'm a doc student at the University of Colorado at Denver. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is actually a collaboration between my doctoral work at CU Denver in educational equity and executive leadership, and my day job as a director of undergraduate education programs at the Colorado Christian University's College of Adult and Graduate Studies, where I'm a director there. And so my research and my day job sort of came together for my dissertation, and it was kind of a nice synergy. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is the research study that was conducted, of course, more importantly, the outcomes and the application of those outcomes at a practitioner level. So what I'm hoping that you're going to get out of today in our time together is, one, that you're going to be able to apply the research base that I'll be sharing with you a little bit here today to know which kind of a discussion model to use based on the learning outcomes that you have for the experience, for that learning episode. The second outcome that I hope you'll walk away with today is that you'll better understand the nature of neo-traditional, aka online adult students, in the context of online discussions. That's where this presentation really is focused, is within that one niche of online learning, teaching and learning, the online discussion. And then the third one is I'd like for you to be able to take what you see and hear today and make it work in your context. If you decide that you want to do something like the VSSD that I'm going to be sharing, those are my 3 intended outcomes for you all today. So I want to start with talking to you about this term neo-traditional student. It's probably something that you haven't heard yet, but I'm hoping that it will become a term that becomes more ubiquitous in academia and just in the general public. Really, the term is an attempt to honor the fact that adult students seeking post-secondary education are the fastest growing online education market by a long shot. And they also became the majority IHE, or post-secondary education population, almost 20 years ago. The thing is, we just don't see them because they were non-traditional, right? They were approaching their learning from a path that wasn't the traditional path primarily it was the online or the sort of remote learning path, and it still is to this day. And so that's why I'm choosing this term neo-traditional. Quite frankly, just because we don't see them doesn't mean they don't exist, right? That's an equity issue that goes way back, and it's still happening today to our neo-traditional students. So I just prefer to call them neo-traditional, the new traditional post-secondary learner. While there's great opportunity to serve this growing market, there's a challenge as well, or a threat to serving this market. And one of the biggest challenges is that even though the online space has created more access to post-secondary education, our neo-traditional students, studies have shown time and time again, they have a lower persistence rate and a lower completion rate when compared to their traditional student counterparts. So that's a real threat and a real challenge. And I know that those of you that are in institutions of higher education and universities and colleges are aware of this reality because it also applies even if they're in a brick and mortar. So the question becomes, how can we take the opportunity that this student group presents, but also try to address this challenge of increasing their persistence and their completion. And essentially that was the focus of this study and the work that was done at Colorado Christian University. Where we landed was we looked at the research around how to increase persistence and completion, and it's pretty clear that if you can increase social presence, learning, and satisfaction, you will increase persistence and completion, or there is a very strong likelihood that you will see increased persistence and completion rates for your neo-traditional students. And actually, quite frankly, this is true of all students. It's not just neo-traditional students. But because it applies to neo-traditional students, we were wondering how could we look at increasing these three elements to increase persistence and completion. And one of the questions that I thought was review or statements actually came from the one you see there on the bottom left. We have the machine, which in this case is the online learning capability or platform, but we're still kind of waiting for the teaching manuals to be written. And I considered that when I was developing this study, and I landed on how can I contribute to the field with some, a chapter in that manual that's related to increasing social presence, learning, and satisfaction. All right, and so that's where we're going to go to here. So where I landed was, let's take a look at the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, of where we could impact social presence, learning, and satisfaction in online delivery. And I landed on the online discussion as essentially the lowest hanging fruit. And so my question was, if it's true, or if you believe that persistence is a problem, and if you believe the research that you can improve that through increasing social presence and satisfaction, then if you can also agree that asynchronous learning, while powerful, while it can be powerful, it does have its limitations when it comes to increasing senses or perceptions of social presence and socially constructed learning, right? And so if you can agree to those things, then let's take a look at the lowest hanging fruit of the traditional online discussion experience, because that's where we have a great opportunity to increase social presence, learning, and satisfaction, and then directly or indirectly persistence in our online programs. So here was this was the research question essentially: is will these neo-traditional students at CCU, and I do need to state that context is important here. We're talking about Colorado Christian University, a private faith-based university, and specifically within that university, the College of Adult and Graduate Studies is where this study took place. So it was focused on neo-traditional within the context of Colorado Christian University. All right, so I want to set that context. So will these students who participate in this VSSD discussion model, and I will explain what that is here next, will they report greater perceptions of learning satisfaction and social presence compared to peers who didn't participate in the VSSD, but they participated in the traditional discussion model, which most of you are probably pretty familiar with. It's the one that's already built into our learning management systems, the text-based discussion model. The research question was actually driven by this critical question, and it's really two questions, that my boss's boss, the VP at CAGS, when I was talking to her about this, she said, you know, we've been in this online learning space for quite a while in our college here, and we've always been operating on that our adult students don't want to be bound by time. In other words, they don't want to participate in synchronous activities. And when I talked to her a little bit about some of the research that I was studying, she actually acknowledged that she'd been thinking about this for a while already, that maybe what we thought 10 years ago when we went online, maybe those are assumptions that are no longer valid based on some of the tools and technologies that are currently available for us today. So, but still, these were two, you know, big questions that she had, and she wanted to basically get an answer to these questions as a result of the research. And so that was also an important aspect of my study. So let's talk a little bit about the models that that were being studied here. The TAWD and the VSSD. The TAWD is the traditional model. It's text-based. It's asynchronous, so you don't have to be together at the same time when you're typing in your discussion content. The whole group typically, at least in this study, this is the model that was compared, okay? They're not always like this, but again, this is the context that I used. Essentially, this was the control group, if you will. And then I introduced the VSSD, which basically flips everything in the TAWD on its head. It's video-based, it's synchronous, it's small group, and then the discussion piece is still the same on both of those, although there is a slight difference in how the discussion was formatted between the two that we'll go into in just a minute. That's essentially the overview of what these two different discussion models were. So now what I'm curious is if you could all go into your PollEV and select the online discussion model that most closely matches what you're using in your courses. Now, I believe I set this up so you could enter multiple items, which is fine if you're using, you know, one course uses B, another one uses C. But if you would go ahead and just kind of indicate the most closely matched models you're using. And the A is the model that we used as our control model. It's the most common go-to model that we are using at CCU CAGS, College of Adult and Graduate Studies. Okay, looks like the voting has slowed down, so I'm going to assume most everybody got their responses in. So very heavily leaning towards the text base. And when we look at the text base, the synchronous is actually the least used among the text-based. The small group synchronous isn't even shown to be used at all. So interesting. All right, well, it looks like 3% might represent within our group, possibly. So I'm glad you guys are here today because I'm going to be focusing on the F choice down there today. So thanks for sharing that, everybody. So this is the study model for those of you that are researchers or doc students or just like to see how a study was set up. This is the study model, and I do want to emphasize that this study was bounded right here at the before measuring persistence. So I didn't actually measure the persistence rates, but I used the research to make the prediction that if we can increase social presence, learning, and satisfaction, we will see increases in persistence. Research just supports that. So that's how it was done. For those of you that like to see sort of how the results came out, I'm going to share Cohen's D effect size. And in academic or educational research, a Cohen's effect size of 0.4 is something to look at. It's something to take. So the satisfaction, the difference between the VSSD and the TAWD, the VSSD students reported significantly more satisfaction in that experience. I'm going to back up just a little bit. So the answer was yes, students reported greater satisfaction in the VSSD when compared to the TAWD, and its effect size was significant. It's not large, but according to Cohen and John Hattie's research, if you follow John Hattie, a 0.39 is essentially a 0.4, and it's something to take note of. They also reported significantly higher, statistically significantly higher rates of their perception of learning, what they learned in the discussion experience. And these are all based on just the discussion experience, by the way. The questions weren't asking it, the course in general. It was from the discussion experience. Did you experience more satisfaction, learning, and social presence? A series of questions for each one of those indicators, but that's essentially what they were getting at. And then for social presence, it had the highest effect size, a 0.57, which, you know, again, according to John Hattie and how we should be paying attention to educational research, that's a big deal and something that we should be paying attention to. So students, again, statistically significantly higher ratings of sense of social presence in the VSSD when compared to the TAWD. All right. And again, if anybody has any questions along the way, please put them in the chat and Brandon, let me know. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead and drill down deeper into the VSSD. What are the elements that were used so that you can try to emulate this or use this within your setting and context? So let's do that now. We're going to take it one letter at a time. We're going to start with the video-based element. And the video-based element was chosen, actually all of the elements were chosen based on all research-based decisions. It was chosen because there really is a rich history of research that tells us that if you can engage in a video setting online, it increases your sense of being real. It increases the sense of others being real. And we know all about what that can mean when we look at what's happening in social media, when we take out our identities and when we can go a little more anonymous. The video-based element takes that away. And it also allows you to see facial, tonal, and vocal cues so that you can more clearly communicate what it is you're trying to say than you might otherwise be able to in a text-based environment. One of the things that I wanted to look at, particularly being an administrator in a neo-traditional college, is would there be some kind of relationship between the age of our student and their ability to function within this more tech-enabled environment, right? We were asking them to use more technology tools than we would ask them to use in the TAWD. So I wanted to isolate tech efficacy as a variable, as a potential mediating variable in this study. And so we did that. And I was so happy to see that the results showed us that there was no correlation between the age of the student and their technology efficacy. And this was a self-report of technology efficacy and their satisfaction, learning, and social presence results. And this is true, by the way, in both the TAWD students and the VSSD students. So this is just a sort of an add-on bonus bit of data for us all, that age was not related to technology efficacy, at least in this study. And I will say that this study, the age range was from 19 to 72 years old. The average age, mean age was 37 years old in this study.
So Jeff, we have a question from Ethan that you may cover, but I want to throw it out there anyway. And Ethan asks, is there any way to see which factor, video or synchronous or small group, had the largest effect?
That is such a great question. That actually was a recommendation that I made for future studies in my dissertation. So Ethan is asking a great question that, no, I don't have the answer to that. It was beyond the scope of this study. There were so many interesting data points that kind of came out of this study that are great recommendations for future studies. In fact, if I have any doc students, future doc students, or just researchers in general who are interested in this kind of research, send me an email. You're going to get my email at the end of the presentation, and I can send you a whole list of great future study topics to pursue, and that will be one of them. Thank you for that question, Ian, or Ethan. And so just from a practical standpoint, we use Zoom. So our CCU uses Zoom institution-wide, so our students have those of you that use Zoom now, many of us, know that there are limitations to the free versions when it comes to the amount of time and the number of people in the room. At least before COVID, that was the case, and it probably will go back to those limitations after COVID. But anyway, we use institutional Zoom accounts. I would strongly recommend that if you're going to use this kind of a discussion, that you make sure your students are fluent with using the technology. And so include a low stakes Zoom type of orientation and a little assignment that kind of walks them through the different elements that they're going to have to be able to do in Zoom in order to do the VSSD. We did that in this, the students that were in these courses, and I should say there were 136 students in this sample from I think there's 8 courses, 8 different courses. So yeah, make sure that they have some kind of training early on in the course, make it low stakes, so that they then can be successful in their first go, because if they're not successful with the first time they have to use it, that can be extremely frustrating, and I believe it would lower their sense of satisfaction in the experience. And make sure whatever platform you use is device agnostic. And on that note, I'd like to know from the group, how many of you have a recommendation for a video-based platform that can really do this small group synchronous discussion well? You'll notice that I had to sort of patch together this model, and I'm going to go ahead and kick you out into the poll EV to start doing that while I'm talking. I had to sort of patch together different elements to make this model work. These elements were not already embedded within our LMS, which, and go ahead and, can you guys enter your response? There you go. And by the way, I believe you can upvote some of these as well. So if you really like somebody else's answer, you can just upvote it, and we'll see kind of what kind of cream rises to the. But what I was saying is I had to pull together different elements to make this one work, because it's not just something that comes with Blackboard, at least. And so it was a little bit more convoluted than just using the traditional discussion format that just comes prepackaged within Blackboard. So I'm just curious if somebody else has another idea for a video platform for this kind of application. So it looks like Flipgrid and yeah, Zoom, because that's the go-to. And honestly, that's why I used it, because our students were already familiar with it. Most of them were. And so it was a platform that I felt like made the most sense. And there was one other element that we're going to talk about later, where they have to make a recording of themselves summarizing their discussion. And that was another reason that I chose Zoom, because it does have the record capture feature. So thank you for sharing that, everybody. Great. I'm going to save that and move on. All right, let's talk about the synchronous element. Why was that chosen for this study? Well, actually, before why it was studied, let me just go through the logistics. Yeah. So the students were expected to have 1 meeting per week, and that meeting needed to just happen before Sunday at midnight. That's when our weekly cycle is in our programs. Is assignments are due typically Monday or Sunday at midnight. So long as that happened before Sunday at midnight, that's fine. So this actually, the students kind of liked it, because it allowed them, some of them couldn't meet until Sunday morning to have this discussion. And in this model, that's fine. It worked just fine. It did need to be about 45 minutes long, we told them, although some took much longer than that, they said, because they went off into more personal conversations, which honestly, that's what I was hoping they would do, because the research shows that whenever we get together synchronously in a video, we tend to become more personalized and increase social presence. So I was very glad to hear that. But they wanted a benchmark, and we told them, okay, 45 minutes, that's sort of your benchmark. The synchronous meetings were scheduled by the small groups, and we're going to get to that scheduling process here in just a second. But it's important that the small groups are scheduling their meeting time, obviously, because they're the ones that know when they're available. And there is no instructor presence, by the way, in this particular model, other than at the end when they interact with their reflection, their video reflection. And again, we'll get to that a little bit later. But other than that, this is really an andragogical-based model where the adults are self-directing the learning during this time, exclusive of the instructor in this scenario. That doesn't mean every element of your course should be exclusive of the instructor. Trust me, I am fully support the community of inquiry framework. And in fact, this particular VSSD addresses an element in the community of inquiry framework. If you're familiar with it, it's the gap between cognitive presence and social presence. And there's between that gap where they cross over, it's called supporting discourse between students and what they're learning. And that's the gap that this study was attempting to contribute to. So I totally value the importance of instructor presence, but in this setting, it wouldn't be appropriate for the reasons I just explained. So like I said, the synchronous element does facilitate personal connections and social presence. people will tend to go off into other conversations beyond the content. And in my opinion, that's actually a good thing, so long as the content gets covered and covered well. So it's like icing. It's actually a good thing. Additionally, one thing I learned was the students actually, once they started getting to know each other in this way, they actually created their own study sessions and video chat sessions outside of this discussion assignment using the tools that they were trained up on to do the VSSD. So that was an unintended but very appreciated outcome. And one of the things about scheduling synchronous meetings is you really have to have a well-coordinated scheduling process. And also, and I'm going to show you how I did it, but the other thing too is the importance of small groups here as well. It's much easier to coordinate small groups, obviously, than it is large groups. So let's take a look at how we had the students manage their small groups. This is a Google sheet, and this was just a link. It was linked in the course shell, so the students could go and see, what group. And it has information that tells them, like there's a link to the protocol for the facilitator. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So if they couldn't remember what their job is as a facilitator, that link would take them there. Right at the top, it tells them, once your group decides on a URL link for their Zoom room, because they all have Zoom links, right? They have to decide which Zoom link they're going to use. They would post that down in the Zoom room for their group. And then we told them 3, 4, or 5 members, no more nor no less. And that's actually based on some research we'll talk about in just a minute. And at the very bottom, you'll see that member 1 is responsible for pulling the group together, making sure everything's going to happen that week, because they're also the facilitator for the first week's discussion. And then that role changes throughout the weeks. So that's the spreadsheet that we used in Google to manage the coordinating the times. I will go back. You'll notice their emails were included here, and that's so that, again, they could all be communicating initially with each other via email, and then finally in their Zoom rooms. So this is the facilitator responsibility list that they linked to in that document. It's also presented in the course shell for the discussion assignment. A little bit of redundancy there, intentional redundancy. But there were specific roles created for the facilitator, and as you're reading through those, you'll see they're not surprising, nothing earth-shattering there, but what's important is that there are some frameworks and guardrails put into this process so that somebody is leading the group. Even though they're all adults, we still need somebody to lead the group, to assume that role. And do we have any questions at this time, Brandon, in the chat?
Nope, we got a little bit of side conversation going on platform. Seems like Teams is pretty ubiquitous for some people.
Love it.
But yeah, I think you're good. Oh, Gloria asks, how do you check they have completed this assignment?
It's a great question. We'll talk about that when we get to one of the later slides. She's foreshadowing one of the bullet points.
Timely question.
Yep. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the small group element. When you look at that Google sheet, what would happen is the instructor would pre-assign all of the groups based on their enrollment in the course. So they would have that done before the first day of the course, before it goes live. And they would just randomly assign the students. Typically, in our case, it was pretty much random. They didn't know the students. And they would fill in just however many groups they needed based on the number of students in their class, but no more than 5 students in each group. The groups between 3 and 5, and that's based on some research out there when it comes to this kind of discussion and collaboration. Groups of 3 to 5 are kind of the sweet spot for it. Less than that, and if one person is absent, there's not a whole lot of discussion happening. More than 5, and if they all show up, somebody's probably not going to contribute or benefit from the discussion. It also, the fact that it's unchanging, I think, is important. We typically run 5 or 7 week courses in our adult division, and so the students don't have a whole lot of time to get to know each other like a full semester course would. So we made the groups stay the same throughout the course. And what I was trying to leverage there was Tuckman's stages of group development, right? And you may have heard the term groups need to go through forming, storming, norming, and before they can get to performing. Well, if we change those groups every week for 5 weeks, they would never get beyond the forming or storming stage. In all likelihood, they wouldn't. We really wanted them forming. And so that's why we chose to say we're not going to change these groups at least for 5 weeks. Now, if you're running a semester course, maybe you could not change them for 4 weeks and then have a new mix for the next 4 weeks and so on. But always try to consider Tuckman's stages of group development whenever you're doing this kind of small group work. Now, like I said earlier, it's an andragogical-based method or adult learning-based method that we're talking about here. If you try to apply this model with the younger learners, your mileage may vary, is all I can say, because this was based on adult learners or neo-traditional learners. This model of the 3 to 5 web-based, video-based discussions is actually was in a study in 2007 by Correa and Davis, and it was determined to be the most popular online collaboration design. And I haven't seen any research yet to counter that, but I just thought I'd share that it is based on at least some research that's about 15 years old. This was an interesting finding that I wanted to share with everybody. Although there were many questions in the survey about social presence, one of them was this one. I feel that members of this discussion group depend on me. This was the only question that asked about how the learner perceived their responsibility to the group. The other questions primarily were about the learner's perception of the group's contribution to them as a learner, so an input. This was the only one that was more of an output. This is, and what's interesting about this question is, out of all of the questions in social presence on that survey, there was the greatest mean difference between the TAWD group and the VSSD group on this one question. Now, that tells me that I would predict that because of the video-based and the small group element and the synchronous element, that we saw that greatest difference there. You talk about future studies and future research, I would really like to see someone study, student perception of their accountability to a group and how that relates to their course or their program persistence. I just found it fascinating. Sorry if I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but does anybody have any questions about or comments about the small group element?
So there is one question in chat. I think he did cover it a little bit, but I just want to kind of throw it out there. Arthur asked, can you share research about the optimal number of members for a small group? And is that Correa reference?
Yes, actually, it's there's other research as well. I didn't cite it because I didn't speak to it directly, but there is another bit of research that says 2 is actually ideal, but that assumes that those 2 people were always there, so physically present, right? So it was based on physical discussions, not virtual discussions, and I didn't cite that because I didn't speak to it here. But I will say that there is other research out there that says if the project or the learning episode is like more problem solving, if you will, or how do I want to say this, or planning, that you could go up to 6 to 10. Okay, but for discussing topics, that 3 to 5 is the research that I was leaning on.
And you have kind of a follow-up question that is, what do you, well, it's very relevant. What do you do with students who have challenging schedules and can't seem to meet with a group?
Yeah, and we had some of those, but very few. One of the benefits of this, and I won't go back to it, but if you look at the, try to picture the Google document, it said on there, if you can't meet at a time that your group that you've been randomly assigned to can meet, then move to a group where you can meet, because everybody was sharing the same Google Doc. They could see when everybody was meeting. So once they landed on a time, there was a space where they would put the day and time that they would be meeting for each group on that Google sheet. And so they had permission to bounce to a group that is at a time that they could meet at. So even though we did have some students, very few, by the way, out of the 136, I would estimate we had like 2 that on any given week, it was 1 week where they just couldn't do it, right? So it was so rare that I believe the model is robust enough when you allow them that flexibility to move groups based on what they're seeing the other times are for the that they're meeting. There are really powerful scheduling tools that I didn't use in this, and if you guys want to be posting those in the chat, Doodle Poll, for example, is a great tool for small group or even large group scheduling. But please post those in the chat. I didn't include that in this study. It turned out I didn't need to because they were able to, in the end, find their groups. Really what it came down to was on any given week, they were with a group and they were scheduled to meet Sunday at 2 o'clock, and then something came up, right? And that was more often than not the problem than not being able to schedule something that would work.
So,
and one of the reasons why I would never recommend doing a video-based synchronous whole group discussion, a VSWD. I would say never, ever, ever do that because of that reason. That does not jive with what we know about neo-traditional learners at all. Unless you have a backup plan, or you're going to offer multiple options, but even then I would discourage it.
So it seems like group dynamics kind of have an effect on folks asking questions. What if some of the members don't get along?
Mm-hmm. So when I trained the instructors on this, that would be doing this study with me on this protocol, one of the things I told them or tried to help them with was like the student that didn't participate, right? So they would be in the room, they would be there, but they didn't do anything. We actually had a rubric, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later when we get to the discussion part, but there was a grading rubric that the instructors used, and one of those elements was participation. Students, maybe I should wait till I get to that. How about I just wait till I get to that? And then if I don't answer it when I get to that, please chime in with that question. It essentially came down to it gets evaluated by the instructor in the rubric. Anything else? Oh, if they're not getting along with each other, by the way, because that's not in the rubric, did you get along with each other? It was more about contribution. If they're not getting along with each other, to me, that's very similar to any other type of classroom level conflict that you might have, whether it's face-to-face or virtual. That happens. And so I would say follow whatever strategies your institution recommends for conflict resolution within courses. Typically, that's something that each institution has addressed and gives you guidance and feedback on how to help students with conflict. In the end, if it's a conflict that can't be resolved and it's causing disruption to the group, right? That's my threshold. Can't be resolved, it's causing disruption to the group. Switch groups, just move them to a different group. We don't have a lot of time courses to mess with that kind of stuff. In a semester-long course, you might have a little bit more time, but if the students can't figure it out and then the instructor can't help the students figure it out, they just need to move to a different group so we can stay focused on what matters most, and that's learning.
Again, I think that prompted yet another question. What about starting as a whole group in a video chat or discussion, and then splitting into breakout rooms for discussions of 3 to 5?
So we didn't go with that model because it presumes that the learners, that we would be able to find a common time for the whole group to meet. And if you've ever tried to do that with anything more than 10 people, you'll find that there will be at least one or more students who just won't be able to join you. And so we really were trying to avoid that whole group scheduling challenge by doing this as a small group.
And then one more. How to score or provide feedback to these groups if you are not present during that meeting? Do you have to watch a video of each group after the fact?
I will get, that is actually foreshadowing another slide. Good question. Anything else?
I think we're caught up now. Thanks, everybody.
All right, cool. So here you go. You guys can see now on this slide number 4. We're going to get to that one. All right. So I mentioned earlier that in this model, the facilitator changes each week. Again, it starts off with whoever is randomly selected to be number 1 in each group, and then we recommended that they just roll it through. So whoever's number 2 is the facilitator the next week, and so on. So here's how it was graded, right? Here's the accountability piece. If you consider this is the feedback piece. But nevertheless, there was a requirement that each individual student record a 3 to 5 minute Zoom audio reflection. And we used the audio reflection, that was the recommended platform, because uploading the video into Blackboard, again, remember I told you I kind of had to piece this together. It can be problematic if the file size is too large. So we just said, just use audio for this. But I really would like to get to the point where we can use video. And I would recommend using VoiceThread if you do that. If we do this in the future, we do have an institutional account with VoiceThread as well. And those of you that know VoiceThread can probably understand why we might want to use VoiceThread for this. The students could just upload a 3 to 5 minute VoiceThread video, and then the instructor could respond and comment on that video within VoiceThread. We had some students some courses participating in this study that don't use VoiceThread, so I'm familiar with it, and I did not want to have to train them on how to use VoiceThread. So that's why we just defaulted to the audio reflection. But again, I strongly recommend VoiceThread, and that is what we will use in my school, the School of Education Professions. If we do adopt this model, we'll use VoiceThread for the feedback. So the students give a little video feedback about, here's what I learned, here are my wonderings, can you help me with this, can you help me with that? And then the instructor would give feedback using the video tool in Blackboard. There is a way to give video-based or audio-based feedback within Blackboard in the Grade Center. So I'm guessing most LMSs have that kind of functionality. But like I said, I'd really like to go to VoiceThread in the future. So the instructor actually will give feedback, answer the questions that the student may have had, maybe correct misperceptions or misunderstandings, and maybe even give some further guidance for things to do moving forward. The instructor then enters a grade in the gradebook for the discussion, and that is based on a rubric that includes quite a few different things. I don't have the rubric here for you now, but there is a rubric, and it's based on their participation, their reflection, and those types of things. So does that answer folks' questions about how this is evaluated and how the instructor ultimately can engage the students? I will say that I did send a survey to the instructors, and one of the questions was, how did you perceive the students learning in between the two? Because, by the way, the instructors were teaching both versions of courses, the TAWD version and the VSSD version. So they were actually able to see sort of both sides of how this was going for the students. And the response back was that they actually perceived that the students had a deeper understanding and analysis of the discussion topics in the VSSD than they did in the TAWD discussion. That wasn't a part of my formal study. It was just something I wanted to provide to CCU as additional data for them to consider. So any questions at this point about that?
Yeah, so it looks like we've got a little bit of discussion. One of them is we've got a couple people requesting the rubric to see if they can get a copy of that. Sure. And then Frank is wondering if you have an example of an actual discussion that you can share.
Oh, wow, Frank. This group is good at foreshadowing, aren't they? Yeah, you know what, I'm going to ask, you're going to get my email at the end, and if you would just send me an email with anything that you want, whether it's a rubric or this presentation or whatever it is, please just send it to my email, and I'll be sure to get that to everybody. So we're going to a critical question from the Vice President at CCU CAGS, and that was, will our neo-traditional students tolerate, let alone benefit from, synchronous discussion activities when they're otherwise involved in asynchronous courses? Let's start with the first question. Will they tolerate it? This was one of the questions in the satisfaction survey that I think really answered this question for us. In the future, I'd be willing to take a course that uses this kind of discussion model. And this was the Likert scale that was used in that rubric, or in that question. And the VSSD, the mean response was in the agree range, and for the TAWD, it was in the slightly agree range. So I thought that that data really answered that question. The answer is yes. They would be able, they would tolerate, at least tolerate doing this kind of a discussion. All right. So the next question is, will they benefit from it? And as you know, I've already told you that we did see, when looking at the VSSD group, significantly higher reports of sense of social presence, learning, and satisfaction. So the answer to this question is clearly, yeah, they'll benefit from this. But here's a question: am I suggesting that we never use the TAWD? And honestly, the answer is no. I'm not suggesting that, and here's why. In our time left, those of you that are instructional designers or educators, which should be everybody in our room, you know that intention matters. We need to start with what the learning outcome is. If you're really looking at a discussion topic that's deep reflection, it's got a lot of processing and complex ideas, and delayed feedback is okay, and instructor guidance is important, then the TAWD still makes sense, okay? I'm not saying we don't do it. What I am saying, though, is if the outcome of the learning activity in the discussion involves groupthink, cooperative problem solving, or debate, strategy development, or needs immediate feedback between, and you want to increase social presence, then the VSSD is clearly the choice that you should be making for that discussion. So I was asked, are there some examples? These are examples, and we're not going to have time to actually go through them. I was going to have you guys guess which one is which, but that's a discussion topic, if you will, and that's appropriate for the TAWD. Here's another discussion topic, and you might all be able to figure out which one this is more appropriate for. In this case, that would be a VSSD topic. Here's another one. And you can post in the chat if you want, if you think it's a V or a T. And the answer is, that's a VSSD topic. And then here's the last one. You can post in the chat if you think that's a TAWD or a VSSD type of a discussion topic.
So, Jeff, we've got about 2 minutes left, and there is a question about how you set expectations for this for students. Is it stated in the syllabus, an intro announcement? How do you get that across?
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of direction in the course shell, right? So in Blackboard, it would be in our week 1 course shell. And so there's a lot of narrative in the prompt for preparing them to do this VSSD and what the expectations are. And then also resources, there were little training clips and videos and that type of thing for how to use Zoom. And so, yeah, there's a lot of setup involved in getting this going. So as an institution, it would be awesome if maybe a college decided to use this model where appropriate in their courses, that they have, make this part of the boot camp, so to speak, when you're onboarding new students into your program, so that you don't have to do it in every course, right? You just do it one time, and then they're familiar with this model. I had to do it in every course within this study, obviously, because it was new to all of the students and the instructors. And so here were the intended outcomes. Just wanted to review those with everybody, and I'm going to go to the last slide while so you can see that's my email, jrenfrow@ccu.edu. And if there's any last minute questions, I mean, we went right up to the minute here. It's now 11:50. So Brandon, you call the shots here.
We did, and up next we have our keynote. I want to encourage everyone to go to. So Jeff's put his contact information up there. Thank you for an awesome session. Obviously, generated a lot of discussion, and we're gonna go ahead and close this out. Give folks an opportunity to maybe grab some lunch and head out. Jeff, do you have any closing words you want to offer to folks?
Yep, I think that pretty. Thank you everybody for listening. If you're again, if you're interested in anything that I had to say and you want to talk more, just send me an email and we can have that conversation.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Jeff. All right, everybody. We have a great keynote coming up at noon. Please join us, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jeff, so much for presenting.
Welcome.